Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you could join us on a Saturday morning. We're honored to have Sabina Spigner, who is a fourth-year medical student at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. She has a Master's of Science in Biology from Chatham University and an MPH from Jefferson College of Population Health. She is a graduate of University of Pennsylvania with a BA in Neuroscience and Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. Driven by her passion of improving LGBTQ plus medical education and healthcare, Sabina served as the executive director of the Medical Student Pride Alliance from 2021 to 2023, which is a national organization dedicated to supporting LGBTQ plus medical students. Sabina will find out in a couple of weeks where she will start her residency in OBGYN and desires to be a clinical educator.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to speak with all of you. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I have some slides to go through, just sort of documenting, or rather sharing with you all a little bit about myself and, oops, wrong button, a little bit about myself and my journey in case you are not already familiar. So I identify as a Black gay woman. And so I speak a lot to pre-meds about what that kind of looks like in terms of navigating your queer identity while also navigating applying to medical school, being a med student, and navigating medical environments in general. And then through that identity, I happened to find Medical Student Pride Alliance in 2019. And I'll speak a little bit more about that as well, because it's a great resource for pre-meds as well as med students. So as mentioned, I am a fourth-year medical student at the University of Pittsburgh. You can follow me on socials. Those social tags are on the bottom of the slides throughout the presentation, and they'll also be on the final slide at the end. And I'm not sure if these are shared with you all or not, but there are like links and stuff in here for folks to have access to. And
yeah, we'll post it. We'll post it after you're done. You can email it to me, and I'll post it on the website.
Perfect. Okay, great. So, yeah, so I'll share a little bit more about me. I'll share my journey specifically from pre-med to med school, because I had a little bit of a non-traditional route. And then we'll talk more about applying to med school as a queer applicant. These are like the most common questions that I get usually asked. And of course, we'll have a Q&A where you can ask me any questions that you all have as well. So I am a fourth year right now. On March 17th, which is in a little under 3 weeks, I'll find out where I'm going to hopefully be training as an OB-GYN, which is super exciting. I went into medicine knowing that that's pretty much what I wanted to do. And it's been really like rewarding and validating to be here now on the end of med school, having almost finished and accomplished my goal of hopefully becoming an OB-GYN. So cross your fingers for me, because on March 17th, myself and med students across the country are finding out where we're going to be doing our final training, or our training rather, for our specialty of choice. So as mentioned, I was the exec director of Medical Student Pride Alliance. So I was their leader for the past 2 years. It's been the honor of my life to be part of that organization and to have led it for the past 2 years, and then to have been a participant on their leadership team since 2019. And that organization means a lot to me. And on the next couple of slides, I go more in depth about what kind of resources they provide and what their goal and mission is. But if any of you are interested, MSPA is also on social media, and it's available to pre-meds and med students and residents, just to help support and build that community for queer health professionals. I'm a non-traditional medical student, so I did not go to community college, but I came from a four-year university with a 2.55 GPA to medical school. And so I talk a lot through my social media presence on how I was able to overcome that lower number GPA and sort of spend my gap or growth years overcoming those lower numbers and proving to med schools that I could handle med school, quote unquote, and all of that. So I do identify as a non-traditional student. Although if you look at the numbers nowadays, the average matriculant age or the average starting age of a med student is around 24 anyway. So while I was 25 when I started med school, or almost 26, most students now are taking gap or growth years. So it's I feel like non-traditional is starting to take a different meaning these days. But I digress. So I also do a lot of research. So I have a couple master's degrees, which I got through my journey to med school. But along that route, I really discovered my passion for doing research. And in undergrad, I was not really keen on research. I did work in a lab, but it was very basic science focused. And I was pipetting and looking under microscopes and doing all of that. And I wasn't really too passionate about it, but I needed the money because I was a work study student. But then also I just knew that I wanted to experience life as a researcher before I ruled it out as an option for me career-wise. So it was a good opportunity to that world. And through my master's programs, I actually discovered the beautiful world of qualitative research, which I really love. And so now using my training, I'm able to really focus on my specific passions of medical education, LGBTQ health and reproductive health and justice, as well as public health. So I sort of combine all of those research interests into various qualitative projects that I do to help improve the experiences of patients and the experiences of students, especially those who identify as queer in medicine, because I think that's a pretty overlooked area of the field. And I think there's a lot to be improved there for both trainees and patients. So really exciting area to be part of. And it's been really fun to sort of be part of the lead a group of folks who are leading the charge on that front. And then if you know me from Instagram, or if you don't, I do a lot of blogging on Instagram where I share not only about my own personal life and my life with my fiance and cat, but I also share more specifically things about how I got into med school, my advice for folks who are in similar shoes as me. I share resources, I share tips, I answer questions. I often mentor people, so I'm very available and I'm very pro social media for folks. So make sure to follow me if you're looking for more tips and advice after this presentation. So as promised, more about MSPA. They are an advocacy organization committed to empowering sexual and gender minority med students and allies, increasing the number of physicians trained in LGBTQ inclusive healthcare, and addressing the unique needs of the queer communities through research, advocacy, and service. You can follow us on social media at MSPA_national, and we also have a website. But through the website, you can join and become a PreMed member. Everything is free. We don't charge for any student memberships. And through the PreMed membership, you're able to access resources, community, webinars, and all these things that we offer folks. So it's a good opportunity and a place to find some support and community as well. So the vision of MSPA was to sort of along the lines of what I was talking about earlier with what drives my passion, was to change the exclusionary culture of the medical community towards queer identifying people, to eliminate discriminatory policies in the US, and to address health disparities. And so all of these kind of guide our initiatives in the organization. And we actually have a conference coming up, which I did not include in this presentation, though I wish I had now, but our conference is in April. 15th through 16th. And if you go to the website, you'll be able to learn more about the conference. It's open to pre-med students as well as med students. Tickets are available sliding scale, and it's going to be a really good opportunity for folks to network and learn more about being queer in medicine and how to, our goal this year is to help folks learn skills to advocate. And so that will be a really good place to sort of build your network and skills in terms of advocacy and all for yourself and for others.
I put the link in the chat too for the conference.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, just we've grown a lot. We started in 2018, and I joined a few months after that. And since then, we've grown to over 100 chapters, over 800 students, and we're all across the country. So just really putting this out there for all of you on the call right now as a resource, since I know that there are very limited resources in terms of not only just standalone resources, but organizational resources for queer specific, or specifically for queer identifying folks in medicine and medical school. So open to pre-meds, and there are a lot of mentorship opportunities there too. So now diving more specifically into my journey from pre-med to med school. So I knew that I wanted to be a physician from a young age. I think I was like around the age of 5 when I told my parents that I wanted to be a doctor. And ever since then, I've sort of been on this track. And when I got to college, I worked really hard in high school. And then I got to college and I was like, great, it's my time to shine. And I absolutely did not shine, or rather I did not shine academically. I shone in other ways. And so I really struggled in undergrad at Penn. It is a great institution, but I'm not too convinced that it was the best place for me. That being said, I did graduate with a major in neuroscience and a minor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. I was technically on the pre-med track, so I finished most of my pre-med courses there. And I ended up needing to work 2 work-study gigs, one being that research lab that I was talking about, and the second being working at the GSWS office as their admin assistant. And I did that for all 4 years of undergrad. And I was also working like a bunch of small jobs on the side in addition to those 2 work-study gigs. So I was very, very busy as a student coming from a background of not having like a ton of money and needing to support myself, while also navigating moving across the country. I grew up in Southern California, and this was my first time being away from home, like by myself. And so I was in Philadelphia, learning to navigate all of that, learning to navigate a big institution and all of it. And it was quite overwhelming. And so I ended up graduating overall with a GPA of 2.95 and a science GPA of 2.55. And by my junior year, I realized that I needed to sort of figure out what I was going to do, if I could do anything to continue my path to med school. And so I like this picture because it's a picture of me from when I was a baby. And I feel like it really captures like just the, I don't know, grit and determination that I feel like I've always had. And so I went to my pre-med advisor, and she was really unhelpful. I feel like this is like a classic story that you hear where a student will go to their pre-med advisor and they might not have the best numbers, and then their advisor's like, well, you should give up on med school, it's not possible. And that's exactly what happened to me. My pre-med advisor was like, this isn't going to work for you. And I just couldn't believe that was true. Like I couldn't believe that I was the only person who had this sort of start that wasn't as easy as some students would hope coming out of undergrad, going straight into med school. And so I started Googling and researching myself what the options were. And I found that there are postbacs, there are masters, there are special master's programs. And ultimately I decided that I was going to apply to all 3 types of those programs, because I knew that I still wanted to do medicine, but I did have to decide, is medicine still the right choice for me? And so I did a lot of like soul searching, and I went on long walks and runs, and I spoke to a lot of people. And ultimately, I came back to the decision that this is still what I wanted to do. And so I was going to figure out a way to make it work, even if my pre-med advisor and other folks were saying like, this isn't going to work for you. Like your 2.55 science GPA is just impossible to overcome. I thought I'd give it a shot. And so I did. And I did a handful of growth years, which I I saw on social media people are starting to like reclaim gap years and call them growth years, and I really like that because looking back on the 3 years that I took, I would not change anything. I'm really glad now that I did have those years to actually grow up and mature and become the person that I am today. Of course, in the moment of it, I was like, like I wish I could just have gone straight into med school. But those years were really important to who I am and my character and my ability to provide care to my patients now. So for the first year straight out of undergrad, I spent my time at Chatham University, which is actually also in Pittsburgh here, and I got my master's of science in biology. I was actually accepted to that program on probation because I had not completed organic chemistry yet in undergrad. I had to withdraw from Orgo in undergrad, so I had a W on my transcript, which was another reason why people were like, you can't go to med school with C minuses and W's on your transcript. Well, I didn't really have a choice. And so I was like, I'm just going to try my best. And so Chatham accepted me on probation under the clause that I had to complete organic chemistry with at least a B plus and also finish the first semester of their grad program with at least a B plus. And so I did that. I ended up actually graduating the whole program with a 4.0. And I actually ended up doing my master's thesis in organic chemistry. So all this to say, some schools just aren't great fits for you. And I think that my having decided to stop doing pre-med courses at Penn my junior year was a really good decision for me because I was able to make up for it and really show that I had skills in the science learning department through Chatham, which I'm really grateful for. So after Chatham, during my time at Chatham, I took my MCAT in March of 2018. And I was gearing up to apply to med school starting in May 2018. So in March 2018, I studied for the MCAT and I ended up scoring a 509, which having had my lower science GPA and my 4.0 in Chatham, I thought a 509 was probably good enough, / I didn't really want to take it again. So I was going to do my best with that. And then I applied to med school starting in May of 2018. And I also decided to spend that year. So applying to med school, if you don't know, takes pretty much exactly a calendar year from May to May. And so I knew that I wanted a master's of public health for my own career development and for my own research development. But I wasn't convinced or sure that I could get into like an MD, MPH dual degree program. And so I decided to just do an accelerated 10-month program at Jefferson University, which I did from 2018 to 2019. And I also got a 4.0 in that program. And so while I was doing all of this during those 3 years, I was also working. So I worked at Chatham in their health department. I worked when I was at Jefferson, Philly. I actually worked at Penn again, my alma mater, in a research clinic there. And I also was volunteering at local hospitals and I was also doing research. So I was super busy during these 3 years that I took, but the whole goal was to really put together a really good package for my med school applications so that when it came time to apply, I decided to apply to 33 schools, MD programs. I was encouraged by folks to apply to DO programs because of the myth that it's easier to get into. Absolutely a myth. It is not any easier to get into DO programs than it is MD programs. And my application was very much geared towards an MD program in that I was very, very, very research driven. And then at the time that I applied, the DO schools weren't as research focused as my goals were. I know that like things have shifted since then, but anyway, I applied to only 4 DO programs, and like almost immediately I was rejected from those 4 programs because it was very clear that my application was not a DO app. And so I was invited to 6 interviews at what I would consider my reach schools on my list. I got waitlisted at almost all of them immediately, but I figured it was because it was like a risk, quote unquote, for them to accept me with my lower GPAs. But I took them as wins because it wasn't a rejection. And then I ended up being accepted to 3 programs Tufts gave me a call and accepted me right away after the interview. Drexel waitlisted me and Pitt waitlisted me. But then I sent like update letters and I was very, very persistent. And I ended up getting off of the waitlist at Pitt on my birthday, which this picture is of me against the yellow brick wall on my birthday after having found out that I got into Pitt. And the first picture with me against the green wall is the interview, like the day that I found out that I got an interview at Pitt in August of 2018. So I like these two pictures, and I went back to the same spot to take it because I don't know, it was just like a nice little full circle moment for me, and it was really exciting because Pitt was a really good school, and I was excited to go. So for those of you who are thinking about what your options are, I have this here, which you can read over after the presentation on your own time, but it talks a little bit about each of the advantages and disadvantages to the different growth year options from post-bac to special master's programs. So I did, just to clarify, I just did the master's option. And it also includes links to resources for you to find out like different programs through the post-bac database. And you can also use my full-length review template that I use to help me study for my MCAT. So take a look at this after the program when you have access to the slides. So now to dive into the main topic of applying as a queer applicant. So the very most common question that I get is, should I be out on my application? And this is a completely personal choice, just as it is to be out in your own life. Being out on your application, there is no right or wrong approach. It really depends on what is important to you, and if it's something that matters to you to be out or not, then you have to really decide that for yourself. I think for me, some of the reasons why I chose to be out were, one, it's absolutely core to my why for going into medicine. My whole goal and drive is to improve the experiences and care that's being provided to queer patients, especially in the field of OB-GYN. And that's what I wrote my personal statement on. That's what I catered a lot of my extracurriculars to. And there was really no way for me to put together my application package without talking about being gay. So I decided that I was going to talk about it. I was going to be out because I couldn't avoid it. And then also it was sort of an auto filter for me because a lot of folks discouraged me in 2018. I think for one, I think things have shifted. And so I think now the talk about it is a little bit different. But in 2018, a lot of people were like, don't do it. This is like your application is too political. Talking about being gay was political, and it was like people were like, don't do it, and my advisors. And I was like, well, I'm going to do it. And for me, it was an auto filter because I didn't want to go to a school that wasn't going to be like a good supportive environment for me anyway as a queer applicant, versus like my advisors who were like, you're not going to get interviews at XYZ schools if you say this. And I was like, I don't really want to go to those schools anyway, because I don't want to go to somewhere that I can't be myself at. So I also sort of used it as a strategic move, which I know a lot of queer folks do tend to use that sort of approach as well when they're deciding if they're going to be out or not on their application. And this is a picture from my engagement pics with my fiance. So choosing where to apply. So I ended up at University of Pittsburgh. These are pictures. The first picture of me with my backpack is on the first day of med school, and the second picture with the stethoscope is like, I don't know, 2 months into med school in front of the Pitt signs. But when you're deciding where to apply, think about if the school fits your mission. So if you want to do research or community work or both, then you can find schools that kind of match both of those. If you have a geographical preference, be it for being close to home or the weather or safety concerns, then definitely take that into consideration. And then also, does the school provide a supportive community for yourself as a queer applicant or as a URM applicant? And does it also support your career goals? And do they walk the walk? So a lot of folks, if you go to their websites, they'll talk about being queer or being supportive of students who are diverse and all of that, but do they do more than just talk the talk? Like, do they actually walk the walk and provide the support, be it monetary or counseling or wellness, all of that? And that you can really find out by talking to other students at the school, and hearing more about it, and checking on social media and things like that. And then lastly, does it pass the vibe check? And so this is more of a question that you'll have to ask yourself once you get to the interview phase of things. But if you get a good vibe from the students, and if you get a good vibe from the school and the community, then like that's usually a good sign that this could be like a good place for you, if it checks off all the other boxes as well. And if you're getting like weird vibes from it, then I don't know, I'm somebody who likes to go off of my vibe checks and guts a lot. And so I always like to include this to remind folks that there is a lot of merit in going off of your own instinct and gut, rather than just the data and numbers all the time. So again, this is a list of resources that you can use. So the very first one, Medical Student Pride Alliance put together a LGBTQ report card of med schools. And so this has been updated as of late 2021, I believe, and they're in the process of updating it further now. But we surveyed med students across the country at different medical schools on different components of things that matter to queer students. So, and then based on the results from those surveys, we created a report card. And this is like a pretty comprehensive list. It includes a good number of med schools. And using this, you can see which schools scored higher versus lower. And that can help you kind of decide where to apply or which schools to accept a seat at. And this is a big PDF packet. This one clip I have is just one page, but it goes more, each school has its own full report going into detail and pulling quotes from the surveys and such. So it's a really good resource and a place to start when you're looking for schools to build out your application list. There's also the Human Rights Campaign, Municipal and Healthcare Equality Indexes, and these both are like nationwide databases available that give similarly like ratings on different cities and different hospitals in terms of how good they are in providing services and care and a community and support to queer folks in those communities. And then the school's websites, of course, and then I really like word of mouth. So talking to the med students, looking on social media, talking to your fellow pre-meds, all of that is really helpful too. So take a look at all of these. Everything is linked, and you can look at that on your way to, or you can look at that after the presentation. This is a picture of me and my med school bestie, who I ended up actually meeting through the MSPA chapter at PreMed, which we ended up starting to create a good community of students together. So you can join, so as I was talking about earlier, you can join MSPA as a pre-med member for free. We have webinars, we have mentorships available, and sometimes we have scholarships for meds, for MCAT prep and for application fees and things like that. Northwestern University has a really comprehensive LGBTQ pre-med page, actually, where you can go onto that page, and it's just like super impressive, all the things that they have there, and it answers a lot of similar questions that I've addressed today, and then it also goes in depth on some other like resources and such, so check that out. And then in addition to MSPA, there are some other mentorship organizations for pre-meds that provide free mentorship opportunities for diverse students. One of those being Prescribe It Forward, and the other one being Black Girl White Co, both of which I've had the pleasure of being a mentor for folks through, and they're both really incredible organizations. So check those out. And then lastly, social media. I think social media gets a bad rep, but it's really useful. It's a really useful tool as a student, especially as a student who doesn't necessarily have as wide of a community available to them locally. Social media can be a good place to network and find support in not only fellow pre-meds, but also med students and residents and doctors. And I've found research partners through social media. I've found coaches for like step one through social media. Like I've just found a lot of really beautiful partnerships and friendships in the medical community, specifically in the queer medical community, which is pretty small. And I found those through social media. So don't be afraid to get on social media, especially Twitter. And even if you're just kind of like a fly on the wall, it's still a good place to be, just to have access to resources and kind of be in the know. So I always encourage folks to hop on. And yeah, so with that, the rest of the time we can answer questions. If you need to email me, my Gmail is here, and then all of my socials are here, and then the MSPA website is on the bottom, of course. So I am available for questions.
I have one question, and please type your questions in the Q&A, but I have one question. In a lot of rooms that you walk into, you are probably most likely the only Black woman and the only Black queer woman. How do you deal with that? How do you address that?
Yeah, that's a very fair question, and it's very true. I am often, especially in a city like Pittsburgh, the only Black person, let alone the only Black gay person, let alone the only Black gay woman in the space. And honestly, I've been very fortunate in my med school career, in terms of like my rotations and such, thus far, to not have experienced much in the way of like microaggressions. But in the few instances, or rather handful of instances that I have, one of the ways that I have handled it is I'm always pretty vocal, and so I tend to escalate almost everything to the appropriate parties at my school as a student. Since we're not paid, we don't have like the same protections as employees. All that we really have as students to protect ourselves are our voices and our faculty champions and advocates. And so my school specifically has a whole process for students to report like mistreatment and different instances that they feel were inappropriate. And so I tend to report frequently if I hear of anything, or if something happens to me rather, and or to a patient, I'll report it and kind of follow that through, and making sure that there are changes made, be it in terms of like not making sure that students aren't placed with working with that department anymore, or faculty person, or making sure that that faculty person receives some sort of whatever training or something. So one of the ways is to use your voice and advocate for change. The other way is if I ever kind of pick up on some sort of microaggressions being made towards my patients who are also like Black or female or what have you, I use my voice again. And a clear example for me comes to mind when I was on my internal medicine rotation. There was a Black woman patient, and she was like having like a mental health crisis basically, and folks were like saying some things that I thought were like pretty inappropriate. And so afterwards, when we were back in the team room, I brought it up, and I was like, by the way, like, I think we should be careful about the language that we're using when we're talking about patients, and if you guys are up for it, I'd really like to talk a little bit more about the impact that language can have on patient care. And so I ended up printing out an article, and we had like a little journal club session the next day talking about language and the impact that had. And so it was another way for me to educate and raise awareness for patient care, as well as sort of without being directly like you all were being like rude and inappropriate. I was sort of able to put them in their place in that sense too. And it's hard as a student because you don't have the same protections, you're being graded and all of that. But at the same time, I'm not one to sort of sit back and just let things happen. So I do try to use my voice as best as I can. And then in the very rare instances where I feel like it's really not a safe place for me to be, I will code switch a lot. And so For example, for my family medicine rotation, I was in rural Pennsylvania, which, if you're familiar with Pennsylvania, is not the best environment for somebody who's Black or gay. And so I decided during that rotation, obviously I can't, make myself not be Black for that 1 month, but I was able to code switch, and I was also able to sort of, unfortunately, in my opinion, I tried to pass as much as I could as straight. And so while I usually wear like rainbow lanyards and have like a rainbow covered water bottle and rainbows on my backpack and things like that, I took all of that off. I use a different water bottle. I use a different lanyard. I didn't dress quite as queer as I normally would. And in that case, it was purely just to protect myself for those 4 weeks in an environment in a time period in politics where I felt like it really was not safe for me physically or mentally to be in that environment, especially as a student. And so that was one 4-week instance in med school. Otherwise, I have not needed to do that, but that's something to consider as a student. And that was also another time that I ended up escalating that up the chain of command at my school too, because I felt like I shouldn't have been placed in that environment in the first place. So yeah, hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that population of Pittsburgh for African American Black population of Pittsburgh is about 23%.
Mm-hmm.
So it is actually, it's not as a chocolate city as Philadelphia, but still it's a significant, and you being the only Black woman in those spaces is a sad thing to report on, but that's a whole different subject. This is a question. How did you feel about doing research about your choice of med school? I rather get overwhelmed and don't know what to do because it feels daunting.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a really overwhelming part of the pre-med application process, is building this list. Not only do you have to decide how many schools to apply to, but you also have to decide sort of in that moment, you have to decide what do you want out of your career and what kind of school do you want to go to. And that's hard to do not having been in med school yet. And for me, how I started was for one, I looked geographically. And this is also how I built like my residency list. And so sort of having this approach as a queer student is, hold on, did I unshare my screen? Yeah, there we go. Sort of how I've gone about it, both for applying to med school and also applying to residency, is starting with the big picture. And so for one, I have geographical preferences, both because of just places that I knew that I would prefer to live in, but then also because of my identities. So I knew that as a Black gay person, there were some places that probably weren't going to be as safe for me or rather places I just didn't feel as comfortable in geographically. And then just being myself and knowing what my preferences are, I knew that I would want to be in somewhere that was urban, or at least as close to being urban as I could get. And so that narrowed my options down. I'm from California, so I applied to all the California, like University of California programs. I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, and so I applied to all the Philly schools. I knew Pittsburgh, so I applied to Pittsburgh schools. And then I knew that Chicago was a really queer friendly and also very medically advanced area in terms of like what they can offer for training. And so I applied to like programs in Chicago too. And I applied to like a ton of places, and I also applied to Boston because of similar reasons. So geographically is a good place to start. And then when you start thinking of other things that matter to you, so is it queer friendly? That's a place, like the next tier to add or take off things from your list is kind of using those resources that I've talked about to help you add or subtract from your list for queer friendly schools. And then the next tier down to consider is like, do you know if you want to do research or not, or if you want to kind of be more community focused? And there are schools that you can find both through Googling and such, and through the resources that I provided, that can add or subtract to your list too. And so for me, when I do these things, sort of jumping in is very overwhelming, but by breaking it up helps me. So starting with geography, and then adding or subtracting based on queer friendly, and then adding or subtracting based on my career goals is how I went about it, because those were my priorities in that time. But take what your values are and what your priorities are and break them up, and then go through it piece by piece, rather than sort of sitting at your computer and trying to come up with like a list of X amount of schools in that one moment. It's okay if on the first day you only have like 10 schools, and you walk away from it and you think a little bit more and you come back the next day. So take it one day at a time, and you'll get there. All right.
This is another question. I'm an RN and had to withdraw from a post-bac program because I have to work full-time to afford rent in Southern California. How do you afford rent working full-time and buffing up your pre-med years?
Yeah. So I have a ton of loans. And it's actually something I just talked about recently on my social media, but I'm about $450,000 in loans right now. And it's because of like, I couldn't work full time during my post-bac program. I just worked like 12 to 20 hours a week, and it was like minimum wage working on campus. And I used that money to pay for like groceries and stuff. But in terms of rent, I had to just take out loans to pay for my programs. And it might be different depending on what kind of program that you're in. But since I was in a grad school program as a full-time student, I was eligible for federal loans. And so that's unfortunately what I had to do and how I was able to afford rent. And then for one semester, I was a part-time student at my grad program, so I didn't qualify for federal loans, but I ended up taking out a private loan. And so it was very expensive in terms of how much debt that I'm in, but it was also the only way that I was able to do it. And when I was in Philly for my not post-bac, but for my second grad program for my master's of public health, I worked about 30 hours a week in my research job, which was a little bit above minimum wage. So not enough to cover rent in Center City, Philadelphia, where I had to live for school, but it was enough to help me get by with groceries and sort of travel costs and all of that, while supplementing the rest with loans. So I guess the short answer is I took out a lot of loans, and I'm going to be paying those off until I plan to do like public student loan forgiveness, which is like a whole other topic. But I'll be paying for loans for a while.
Yeah, we actually had a person who was a nurse, and then now is an orthopedic resident and a single mom. And so she talked about that. If you can, you could go and watch that video. I think she spoke last semester. So if you look at our past events, you could pull up her video. But and actually, we had a dean of admission last night talking. As a nurse, you have a lot of options. You make quite more money than minimum wage. And I think, unfortunately, with post-bac programs, that you don't get federal loans. You have to take out private loans. But the other part of it too, doing it part-time is a way to do it. And I think that person who was a nurse did her post-bac at a community college part-time, and she got into Michigan State, and she was from Michigan, and is doing her also residency as well. So yeah, I think as a nurse, you have a lot more options because you make quite as much, and I actually work with two nurses that are doing their pre-med stuff at a local community college, and also going part-time at a CSU. And so, yeah, I mean, it is possible, but yes, but and even though Sabina is taking out a lot of, I think it is pretty daunting if you're a first gen student and poor, because that's $500,000 buys you a pretty decent house in California, not like in the best area, but so it is but also when you get out, I mean, Sabina, you could say your starting salary as a practicing OBGYN is, six figures. It's
Mhm.
300. I think it's like 350,000 in California
Yeah, that's average. Yeah, like
starting.
350 to 450, depending on what kind of practice you have. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is daunting, like you said. And I'm not first gen in terms of college, but I'm the first in my family to go to med school and become a doctor. And so I didn't have like anybody to talk to about finances and how to go about all of that. And I also didn't have anybody to help me pay for med school. So it was really my only option when it came to not only the postbacs, but also paying for med school. And there are scholarships, and there are some schools that are now tuition free or offer certain packages for folks who are first gen and things like that. And so that's also something to consider when you get down that line. But I've been fortunate to receive a number of scholarships through my time in med school to help bring down the cost, even though it was still a lot because I went out of state. But that's also something to consider in state schools. So had I gone to a UC in California, my loans would have been dramatically less. But unfortunately, I was just waitlisted and I didn't get off those wait lists. So this was my option.
Yeah. No, most of us that don't have that luxury, you're just gonna have to be resilient. And it is very, it's scary, but I've not met any doctors that are unemployed, or cannot find jobs or are struggling. I mean, a really good friend of mine just finished his residency. Both him and his wife are about $850,000 in debt between them, and they're not afraid. They're like, you know what, we're going to be okay. So yeah, it is daunting though. I think having career, this is another question. I think having career doctors in multiple specialties, great thing for future patients. How do you plan on having this part of the identity positively influence how you practice medicine as a future OBGYN besides patient education and providing safe space for queer patients?
Um, I mean, those are two of the bigger things for sure, and definitely my main drive. But I think beyond that, just representation really matters. And for one, I'm really excited to be queer in a field that I feel like is not, or traditionally has not been, very queer or LGBTQ friendly. It's a very binary field, OB-GYN, just based on its history and how it's come about and all of that. Everything's always pink and purple and all these very like cisgendered approaches. And so I'm really excited to, and sort of exhausted also thinking about it, but to enter these spaces and be like, oh, like, have you guys considered maybe making this clinical space a little bit more inclusive and things like that. So beyond patient education, I think one of the ways that I'm excited to use my identity to positively influence is to educate my peers and my colleagues, and help sort of shift the conversation and dynamic that exists in the OB-GYN field to being definitely more inclusive of folks. And then as a practicing physician, my identity and my experiences have, one of the reasons why I wanted to go into OB-GYN is because I did not have great experiences with OB-GYNs early in like college and things like that, being Black and gay. And so that influenced why I wanted to go into it. And having those experiences under my belt, as well as the lived experience that I have with these identities, as an OB-GYN, I'm really excited to be able to draw upon that sort of humanness and personal experience while I'm providing care to folks and while I'm interacting with my colleagues. Because I think when you're going through med school, you'll find that you learn a lot of things by the books, and you learn a lot of things by textbooks, and this is how you are supposed to be empathetic, and everything is very like sort of teach, like you're just supposed to, like, teaching you how to like be nice, and and it's necessary honestly for some people. But I think for me, and what I've found a lot of joy in when I'm providing care to folks in these spaces, is that I really am able to just be myself and I'm able to just be a chill, normal human who just happens to know how to provide medical care to you. And that my lived experiences happen to match your lived experiences to the extent that they can. And so it's been really rewarding to interact with my patients in that sense. And I've had a lot of Black patients thank me for my presence and thank me for being on this journey. I've had a lot of queer patients thank me for being there to hold their hand, or being there to make sure that people are using the right pronouns and updating their names in the system and things like that. And so I think just drawing upon the humanness and the empathy and compassion that I've had, that I have innately, but I've also sort of built up through the years of having my own experiences navigating the health field as a Black gay person, will help me a lot in terms of providing care. And then also just grit and resilience, which you know, there's a lot that can be like a whole other conversation. But I think that my journey to medical school and through medical school, but also my personal experiences have allowed me to grow into a pretty gritty person when it comes to, not take, like, I just like I said earlier, I just use my voice a lot. And so if I ever really witness or experience anything on the floors as an OB-GYN resident or attending, be it in myself or my patients, I don't anticipate sort of just watching it and letting it go by. I anticipate being somebody to escalate it and make changes and make sure it doesn't happen again, to protect myself and others. So I'm hopeful that I'll have a positive influence on the field and on my own practice, but we'll see how things go.
The other question is, I guess this is more on your other hat as the executive director of Med Pride, is of all the stuff that's happening across the country with anti-LGBTQ and trans and all the stuff that's happening, what are you guys doing as an organization, but also, protecting, because some of these students are going to be targeted, and and so even though we may think that medical schools are safe spaces,
Right.
we know the reality of it not being.
Right. Yeah. So MSPA has partnered with our peer organizations like SNMA and LMSA, the Black and Latinx groups, as well as PAMSA, which is the Asia Pacific Islander group. And there's a bunch of different affinity groups that we've partnered with. And through those partnerships, we've all sort of started working on like a way to help train feels like a weird word to use, but to help guide students to be advocates. So like talking to your local politicians, talking to your state politicians, things like that, as well as advocating at your schools to have your schools speak up or to raise awareness with your classmates about how they can make changes and things. So sort of helping to create a group of change makers and provide people with resources to become advocates. It's a question that we get asked a lot. A lot of our members are like, hey, I want to send an email to my representative, but I don't know where to start, or I don't know who to call. Do you have resources or like a template for us? And so we've done this in the past, where we have these templates on our website available, but then in this acute moment of history, unfortunately, we are in the process and have been in the process of like creating different resources and guides for folks to use in that moment. Also our conference will be a really good place for this too, because it's all about bridging healthcare and advocacy. And so we're going to have like representatives there from med schools, both in terms of students and faculty, to help similarly like teach and train and guide students on how to have a voice, and how to protect themselves and to protect others. And then on like an individual level, we have talked with students in a similar manner that I'm like doing this webinar. We've hosted webinars with students who are like med students, to kind of give them tools on how to advocate for themselves if they experience microaggression, or if the school isn't providing resources to queer students and things like that. So a lot of it is sort of giving folks the tools and language that they need to go off on their own and lead to change or to protect themselves. And we've done a handful of like, we're just a 501c3 nonprofit. And so we have to be careful about like what we can do in terms of like political engagement, but we write a lot of statements, which we've sent out in collaboration with our peer organizations. And we, I just blanked on what I was going to say. Oh, we've started to create and provide like scholarships for folks. And then we also have partnered with like some chapters who have reached out to us about needing assistance in terms of similarly like language and evidence to help support why they need the resources at their schools and things like that. So we've helped chapters individually put together like their own sort of advocacy campaigns at their own institutions. And yeah, I feel like all that boils down to we try to help our members in our chapters as best as we can in terms of giving them resources and tools to advocate. And then, oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. Sorry, I forgot. We've done like national campaigns and stuff. So we like worked with the LCME, which is the medical student, basically the people who accredit like medical schools and approve of their curriculums. We advocated for them to improve their requirements of med schools to teach around LGBTQ health. And so we were pretty successful in that. And then we also sent out a petition and advocated to have the AAMC change their applications for med schools and for residency programs to be more inclusive. So before this year, the AAMC applications for med schools didn't include like a space to talk about pronouns, and their gender options were like very limited, and the same for residency. And then we sent out a survey, or rather a petition a couple of years ago, which has been garnering signatures and such. And we chatted with the AAMC over the past few years. And this year they just updated for the cycle their med school application interface. And so now there's a place for you to put pronouns, and there's a place for you to share your gender identity and things like that. And so we've been really vocal about the need for more collection of this demographic data to help improve not only representation, but then also like advocacy efforts down the line, because we'll have numbers to pull from to sort of show that LGBTQ medical health professionals are underrepresented too and need resources and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think somebody was asking resources on MSBA, this self advocacy strategy. If there's a
Yeah, so if like in terms of like how to advocate for yourself as a student and things like that, if you join as a member on our website, you'll get access to like the membership portal, and then through that portal there is a resource drive, and it has like email templates, letter templates and things like that for yourself to send to your schools, and then also for yourself to send to your representatives and stuff. And everything that we do is online. So we're a completely online organization. So everything that we do will be posted on our website mostly. And then if you want like updates, it'll be posted on social media. And then like our conference is entirely virtual and will be available. If you're not able to make it that weekend, for example, you can still access the conference like recordings and resources that are delivered through the conference for a month after. You still have to buy a ticket, but they're like $5 to $20 if you're a student. And then those resources will be available there too. But yeah, if you join as a member, the resources are on the website.
The other question is, as a woman of color, you do face a lot of biases, certainly in your pre-med advising. And we're actually going to have a whole talk about that. But how did you personally deal with it? Not deal with it, but how did you address it, overcome it, but also were able to, advocate for yourself and, at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. So my pre-med advisor I didn't even, so I mean, it works differently at all schools, but like at Penn, when I was I think I went like my junior year, second semester, or first semester or something. Anyway, I was like, I need help. And so I'm going to go to this pre-med advisor. I think there's a pre-med office. And so let me look it up. And I went, and you're just assigned somebody based off of your last name, and Penn, like a lot of other schools, the advisors have no experience in medicine or med school. And so my pre-med advisor was like an English PhD who just like happened to work in this office. And she she was very much like operating on what a lot of folks are, which is like, you need to do a pre-med major, you need to get X GPA, you need to do all these things to check off the boxes. And if you fall anywhere outside of that box, you're not going to get in. And so that, plus the inherent bias that she and many other pre-med advisors have against people with color or people of color who have GPAs like mine or experiences like mine, led to her being like, you're not going to become a doctor. It's not possible for you. And I think, for one, I've always been the kind of person who was like, if I'm told that something's not possible, I'm hesitant to believe that that is truly the case unless I have explored it myself. And so the minute she said it's not possible for you to get into med school, in my mind, I was like, I feel like it probably is possible for me to get into med school, and you're just like not telling me something. And so I probed her. I sort of pushed her to, when I was sitting in her office, I very distinctly remember sort of filing away what she said and then being like, okay, this woman obviously is not going to provide me with any help, but at least I can maybe get something out of her. So I didn't know, prior to this office visit, I didn't know even like the language. Like, I didn't know that postbacks were a thing. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know about masters or special masters programs. And so I asked her specifically, I was like, okay, I know you think that I can't get into med school with my numbers, but what have you seen other folks do who have a lower GPA, even if it's not as low as mine? Like, what are options for those folks to try? And so I asked her, and she presented me, she started talking about postbacks. She never talked about masters or special masters, but she talked about postbacks. And so I just wrote down postback on my paper. And she said, like, you're going to have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money, and you're going to need to like really, do a lot of work if you're going to try and do it, and it's just not worth it. Maybe you should just look at something else. So I left. And then I called my mom. I cried. I felt my feelings about it. I felt pretty discouraged in that moment, but I was like, I don't think that I'm going to give up yet. And so I went home, and I looked at my notes from that meeting, and I started just Googling on my own, what's a postbac? And through that channel of postbacks, I learned about special master's programs. I learned about master's programs. And I sort of just stopped going to her. I didn't go back to her at all until when was it? I think it was when I was applying to med school. I needed somebody to look at my personal statement, and I was at Penn working. And so I ended up sending it to her and like a bunch of other people just to have more eyes on it. But that was like 3 years after I'd last talked to her. And she was like, oh, wow, like, you're applying to med school. And I was like, yep, I'm applying to med school. And then after that, I didn't communicate with her again. And then actually last year, when I finished my third year med school rotations, I was on like the final stretch, or I think it was actually when I finished applying to OB-GYN. I submitted my applications in September, and I wrote her a letter, and it was a very long letter, and I sent it to her. And I called her out on her bias, and there's a lot of data to support, like you said, the bias that goes into advising folks who identify like myself or others. And I called her out on it, and I said, look, despite what you said, I ended up doing 3 years. I did a master's program, and then I did another master's program. I got a 4.0, even though you told me it wasn't possible. I got into a great med school. I've won awards, I've won scholarships, I've done XYZ, and I'm on my way to being an OB-GYN. No thanks to you. And then I told her, like, I really I send you this letter because I really want you to do a deep dive into yourself and think about why you chose to discourage me and however many other students you've discouraged, and think about the harm that you're doing for those communities and for those individuals, and really like maybe do some learning and figure out that it's possible for people to get into med school, and that it's not your job as an advisor to discourage people, but rather it's your job to help them figure out a path for themselves that works for them. And I said all that to her, and she responded, and I don't even remember what she said. It wasn't a satisfying response, but I felt really good having sent that to her. So again, similar to how I've kind of navigated situations in the past, I just sort of used my voice, and I used my grit to overcome what she told me, and I used my drive to figure out a path for myself, and then I used my voice to sort of call her out or in later on down the road, and hopefully she learned something from that. But yeah.
I always think it's so ironic that cost always comes up with first generation students and students of color, but but other groups it just rarely.
Right.
The other question is, and you touched on it a little bit, why did you choose a master's program instead of just a straight up post-bac? Can you go a little bit about that thinking and process?
Yeah, so I after learning about the 3 different options, I applied to all 3 options. And initially I was hoping to do just like an accelerated sort of 1-year thing and then apply. I graduated undergrad in 2016, and so my goal was, okay, I'll do a program and apply to med school in May of 2017. So I'll only take 1 year off. And I applied to many programs. I applied to all the programs in Philly, from post-bac to master's to special master's. I applied to all the programs in California. I applied to, my partner lived in DC at the time, so I applied to programs there. And then I applied to, I'd never even considered applying to Chatham actually in Pittsburgh until my mom told me to, because my brother was a student at Carnegie Mellon here. And so that was my only connection to Pittsburgh. I'd never even been, but she was like, you have your brother's there, so you might as well apply there, see if there are any options there. So I applied to all the options in Pittsburgh. And then I didn't get into anything other than Chatham. So it's not that I necessarily opted for or opted out of a traditional post-bac, but rather they opted out of me. And so it was my only option to go to a regular master's program like Chatham. And they accepted me like on probation, like I said. And so I think it was really hard for programs to accept me because my GPA was so low, and a lot of them have a minimum of at least 3.0. And I didn't have that. And I also hadn't completed the pre-med recs because I didn't have organic chemistry. So like Penn didn't accept me, my own school. And I was really upset by that. And because I talked to the like Penn director of the program at the time, and I thought we had like a good vibe. And I had a lot of people advocate for me after I found out that I didn't get into that program, and tried to get them to change their mind, and they didn't. And so ultimately the master's was my only option. But having gone through it now, I mean, obviously I'm kind of biased because I did really well and it was a really good fit for me, and it was ultimately the right like thing to have happened for me. But having gone through it, because I had to take out loans and because it costs a lot of money, postbacs are pretty expensive and master's programs are also pretty expensive. Postbacs don't give you like a degree. Sometimes you get a certificate, sometimes you don't get anything. But at least with the master's, I was like, well, I have a master's degree now and it costs me a lot of money, but at least I have something. And so if I didn't get into med school, my plan was to actually just teach like as an adjunct professor using my master's at Chatham or somewhere else that would accept that. And so I felt good about having had that as an option at least, and having had that grad degree under my belt. And then the biggest consideration to make if you do end up having a choice between the two is that the post-bac, your GPA, like on your AMCAS application, the grades that you get from a post-bac will automatically feed into your undergrad GPA. And so like programs would see, sure, I had a 2.55 GPA in undergrad, but then my post-bac courses would have added to that GPA directly, and then they would have seen like whatever the higher GPA is as the final output. But because I did a master's program, the GPAs on the transcripts output as two separate things. So they saw my 2.55 science GPA just there in bold, and then underneath it, they saw a grad GPA 4.0. So there was no way for me to hide that I ever got a 2.55 in the first place as easily as it would have been if I had done a post-bac. And that's something that's on one of the slides that I talk about, that with the different resources for gap years that you can look at after. So that's something to consider. But ultimately, if you put together a good package in your application, and if you do well enough in grad school and things like that, it's okay. So I think for me, I ended up being okay with having done a master's, but also it was my only option. And I figured I had the choice to not take it and to just reapply to postbacs, or to do like a DIY postbac situation. But I decided to just run with this program and see what I could do with it. And I'm glad that I did ultimately.
This is the $1 million question. How did you learn to be confident enough to advocate for yourself and others?
That's a really good question. I think I've always had to advocate for myself. So some background that I didn't include in my About Me was that I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Orange County, California, which, if you know, is a very white conservative area.
Where'd you grow up? I grew up in Orange County.
Oh, I grew up in Laguna Hills.
San Clemente.
Oh, nice. So I grew up in Laguna Hills, and if you're not like a rich white conservative person in Orange County, or in where I was growing up in Orange County, it's a pretty hostile environment. And so I was not, and by the time I got to high school, I was not rich, and I obviously was not white, and I definitely wasn't conservative. And so being one of like 4 Black students in my high school class, as well as all of my education up until that point.
Did you go to LHS?
I did, yeah.
So do you know that I think it was like recently they got suspended for making racial comments at a basketball game?
Yeah, I saw that. It was like on national news.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't go there, like nobody looked at me. Actually, no, my brothers and I saw that, and we were like, this tracks. But yeah, so like if you saw that article, that really speaks to where I grew up. And I think having grown up as like, a minority in an area like this helped me build up my own sort of grit and resilience. I was really vocal in high school for queer. I didn't even really know that I was gay. I knew that I wasn't straight, but I wasn't like out and proud and loud for many reasons. But for one of them, I was still figuring things out. But what I did know is I wasn't straight, and I did know that the way that people were talking about queer people was not right. And so when I was in high school, I don't know if this ever made the news, there was like a lot of sketchy stuff happening in terms of people trying to like create these campus clubs and organizations that were really anti-LGBTQ and really harmful and hurtful. And they like created like advocacy videos and campaigns to help encourage, like the parents had to like vote on it or whatever, like the vote on the support of these organizations or something. And
Board of Trustees, yeah.
Board of Trustees, yeah. And so the organization created campaigns to like get people to vote for them, and then students like myself did our own stuff to be like, don't vote for them. And we were really loud and vocal to get to the principal. So like I ended up writing like a letter to the principal and talking with him and some other students and being like, this is not good, like we shouldn't have this organization here. And then it ended up not going through, thankfully. So that was what I just had to like advocate for myself in that sense. I had a lot of like things said about me, and people accused me of a lot of stuff, just like racially and all the biases, and I had to advocate for myself in that sense. And when I got into a school like Penn, a lot of people were like, you only got in because you're Black, and all of that. And so I had to advocate for myself there. And so I think, unfortunately, just having grown up where I grew up and with the experiences that I did, that sort of built a sense of resilience and drive within myself to not sort of sit back and take that. And then when I moved to a place like Philly, which is majority Black, it was almost like an interesting culture shock coming from a place like Orange County, but in a good way. And then going to a PWI, a primarily white institute like Penn, in a place like Philly was a whole other thing, where I had to further learn how to advocate for myself on this big campus. But I think just through all of that experience, and I don't know, I'm really driven by making sure that people are like not being people are being nice to other people. And so if people aren't being nice to me, or people are, you know, being harmful or saying harmful things to other people, I tend to speak up. And I think all of that's led me to have this sense of drive within myself to protect myself and others as best as I can, especially in a school environment where students are often viewed as like the lesser ones, even though we're literally the entire reason that schools exist. So they should be treating us better, but they often don't. So I am really passionate about education too.
Yeah, no, Laguna Hills is very. I mean, the whole South Orange County is. Yeah, the only thing that I would add is like advocacy and leadership. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like
Yeah.
you don't just wake up one day and become a great leader. You got to or read a book about. I mean, you could read a book about it to learn certain things, but you got to do it by doing. And if you do it long enough, then you become good at it. But certainly, growing up in a white area at a white school, and also in Philadelphia in a chocolate city, at a white institute. I mean, Penn is like literally like 2 blocks from it is a predominantly Black and little poor society,
Mm-hmm.
but they have this it's a whole different world, literally like a block from campus, very
Mm-hmm.
much like USC. I think people in California
Mm-hmm.
would really understand USC is. I had a friend who went to undergrad there, and he was paying, I think, 20, like he was going to get an apartment, and it was like $2,500, and literally 3 blocks away, that same size apartment was like $1,200. And so
Mm-hmm.
he's like, so but I think but overall, like advocacy and leadership, like you got to do it, and you can't sit on your couch and say I'm going to become a great advocate. I think we've had a couple of deans of admission that say, people like to write on their application that they want to serve the underserved, and or want to do all of this stuff, and you look at their 5 years of undergrad, they haven't done anything. Where
Mm-hmm.
and or people that tell me, oh, I want to help poor people, but I go 2 weeks in a place that's brown and Black to do that. Well, you spend 5 years at UCLA, and you literally go 2 exits and you're in Skid Row, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of programs like Homeboy Industries, a lot of these things you could be involved and engage, and you didn't do it. What do you think that we give you an MD degree, you're going to be a magic fairy to go out there and help people? It's just not going to happen. So
Yeah.
I think the track record is really important, but also you don't like. I mean, obviously, you had the the unfortunate or fortunate. I don't know how I want to look at it. Growing up in Laguna Hills, Orange County, that you had to do that because literally those spaces are not safe. I mean, the head of the Orange County Proud Boys was a
Mm-hmm.
member of the school board. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like we're not like the only reason I know this stuff is because I grew up there, so I know what it is. It's not. I mean, I'm in the Bay Area now, but you still have that a little bit, but it's not as bad as.
Right.
But anyways, those you had to be in those spaces, and so um, yeah, you had no choice to
Yeah.
stand up. But and
Yeah.
some people are not able to do it, but I think it's just by doing. I think that's.
Yeah. And I agree. Yeah. I mean, and that's the other, I didn't talk about that, but like all throughout high school, I was volunteering actually in San Juan, Capistrano, at a place called Shea Center, which offers like horse therapy, hippotherapy camp training to patients who are physically disabled or have like different mental capacities and things like that. And so like for, I don't know, 6 years I did that. And so that was like a form of advocacy that at the time, as like however old I was, I didn't realize, but then seeing and hearing how people talked about those patients and then advocating for them in those spaces helped me sort of get my growth as a leader, like you're talking about. And then throughout college, I volunteered and I taught in West Philly, 2 blocks up from campus in elementary schools. I taught science and I taught neuroscience at high schools. And I taught like physics and biology to 3rd graders at one of the other schools. So I got my advocacy through there. And then I also like volunteered at various underserved clinics and stuff. And so all of what you're saying is true. Like, not only will you learn through doing how to advocate for others, but through that, you'll also strengthen your voice and skills and how to apply that to yourself when you get into spaces where that's necessary too.
Yeah, no, it's but I think like, if you want to become a leader and advocate, you just got to start doing it. And obviously you're not going to walk in and be the executive director of MedPride, but you built to it. You don't
Yeah.
like it's kind of like, you don't show up the first day of medical school and they tell you, okay, well, go do this emergency C-section
Right.
on a traumatic patient. You're not going to do that first day of med school. So same thing with like advocacy and leadership. And the other part of it too, I think there's a lot of information you could find on the internet. Like the internet's been a great resource of finding like advocacy. I had a classmate of mine who had some issue with the professor being a little bit sexist, and so I sat down with her and I was like, well, there's this thing called the internet and you could pull a lot of things and all of the stuff they're doing. And so we sat down and wrote this thing, and sure enough, but yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. Does anybody have any other questions? Because I'm sure Sabina has other things to do today. Like, planning. When is your wedding, by the way?
The day before graduation. So it's May.
How do you plan a wedding as a 4th-year medical student and residency?
Yes, it is. Yes, my fiance and I talk about it every day. We're both very stressed. Not only do we not know where we are going to be living shortly after the wedding and graduation, but it's just, yes, it's a lot. But it just worked out that way that it ended up being the day before graduation. We actually planned the wedding and then they moved graduation to the day after it. So
We should interview her how she puts up with it. That's
it's been a lot, but it'll happen in a blur. The most chaotic 3 months of my life, and then it'll be over.
Well, very cool. Well, good luck on the match.
Thank you.
Good luck on the wedding. Gosh, wedding, graduation.
Yep,
That's a lot. Moving to where?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Who knows? We'll find out in 3 weeks.
Yeah, no, to me, it's always like an amazing thing that you literally like you find out like where you're gonna spend the next 3 to 6 years or whatever, but you have
Yeah.
no idea. You can't do it. I mean, you do it in your interview, but it's not the same.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyways, well, it was really nice having you and really enjoyed hearing.